Sometimes I feel like my job is just to make sure that everyone does what they say they're going to do. And that includes keeping myself accountable. So why is it so hard for us to follow through on our commitments? Well, today's guest is here to help us unpack this exact issue so we can help ourselves and our team members get more done. Today's guest is Stephen Blue. Steve is the CEO of Miller Ingenuity, which creates high technology products that save lives and preserves the environment. He is a keynote speaker and has addressed audiences at Harvard Business School, the United Nations, Carnegie Hall, the Safe America Foundation, and many more. Steve is also the CEO in residence at Winona State University, and author of 5 best-selling books, including Mastering the Art of Success, The $10 Million Employee, and Metamorphosis. He works with executives, leaders, entrepreneurs, and anyone seeking to learn how to maximize their company's growth through fostering company culture and innovation. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I share new episodes and offer tips for managers every week that you won't want to miss. Now, here's my conversation with Stephen. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stephen. I'm super psyched to talk with you about how we can better get our team members to do the things that they need to do, that we need them to do. So much of being a manager can just feel like herding cats, and that's not what it should feel like. It should feel like everybody is on the same team and all excited to do the work. So thanks for coming on and shedding some light on this thing that we all have to do every single day.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So what are some of the common reasons that people just don't do what they say they're going to do, right? Like we come out meeting, I say, you're doing this, great, you're doing this, and then none of it gets done. So like, what are some of the things that create this problem of people not doing the things that they said they're going to do?
Well, it's the inexplicable human being problem. People are different. Everyone has different needs, values, expectations, and the dynamics in a team or more than one person, and even the dynamics of one person can greatly affect an outcome. I'll give you an example. I was just this morning, I was on a conference call with 2 or 3 of my key people reviewing my sizzle reel on my website. One of them had an opinion about this. The other one had a different opinion about that. And the third one didn't have any opinion at all. And if you're not careful how you treat people with differing opinions, I'll give it, if I said, you know what, Amanda, you're exactly right. What is the other participant here? I'm wrong. I must be wrong. And so then there's a natural friction there. So the management of the dynamics of people and their interests and their fears and their feelings and so forth is key. And what happens often is a leader will say, I want you to do such and such as such a thing. And then they check back later on, it wasn't done. Wait, why was that? And they automatically blame the employee, but it's mostly not the fault of the employee. And I tell CEOs all the time, if you're going, especially big decisions and big outcomes, you have to be very, very crystal clear on what you want and what you need. And it would be a mistake to assume that the employee actually knows how to do what you want. More often than not, maybe the employee didn't know how to do it, but that's why they didn't do it. They couldn't do it because they didn't know how to do it, and they're afraid to tell the boss, I don't know how to do it.
The idea that they didn't know how to do it and they didn't want to tell us they didn't know how is, I think, such an important insight. And we make so many assumptions about what people are capable of. And sometimes they actually can do it, I think, but they just don't feel comfortable doing it or confident doing, or right, they're afraid to figure it out because they don't want to do it wrong. But sometimes they actually legitimately don't know how to do it. And we have to pay attention to that. I'm wondering if you have any stories or examples of what that looks like or what those conversations look like so that we can avoid making those assumptions.
The first thing you have to do is you have to give people permission not to know. And my first executive job, moving up from middle management to exec, this is a long time back. I don't, maybe 30 years ago. And I was a divisional vice president. I worked for the president and CEO. And every time I was supposed to do something, I was terrified that I didn't know how to do it. And sometimes he would come to me and go, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? And I was terrified to tell him because I don't know how. Especially when you're new in a position, maybe you're not going to know how to do most of it because you've never been in it before. He just terrified me, and it would have been a lot. So I had to go figure it out on my own. and I was making a lot of mistakes. And then you make the mistake because you didn't know how to do it. And then the boss comes back to you. And now you're in trouble for making the mistake because you didn't know how to do it. It's sort of an endless loop. Would have been better if he said, I know you're new in this position and you probably got some, misgivings how to come to me anytime. But he didn't do that. He acted like, and this is a mistake for any leader. He acted like I should already know. You gave me the job, didn't you? Shouldn't I know how to do it? And that's a huge mistake. You always got to give your people permission not to know anything.
It's so simple. Just say, if you get stuck, if you're confused, come grab me. Let's talk about it. We'll work it out together, right? It's such a simple thing to say and so powerful for people to hear. I would imagine there's also this piece of it that is like, it's okay if you don't know how to do this. I want you to go out and figure this out, even though it might seem scary. And there's like the cheerleading piece of it. Is that part of it too?
Absolutely right. I mean, it's a mentoring role. When you're a leader of people, you're in a mentoring role all the time. Sometimes it's best for them to go out and figure it out on their own, as long as they know that you're mentoring them and you're not judging them. So you would say, I think you're going to probably make a few mistakes along the way doing this thing, but I think it's better for your development that you go out and figure it out. But don't worry, I'll be here if you need help.
Okay. What about saying to someone, I trust you to do this. I'm handing over this responsibility and I trust you. Is that creating more stress for folks or is that empowering them or something else entirely?
I think it's empowering them. Two greatest phrases in the leader's vocabulary are I trust you, because they're always wondering, do you or don't you? And maybe if you work for somebody for 50 years, you don't worry about that. And the other one is, the other most powerful phrase of a leader is, I'm proud of you. Imagine if your boss tells you he or she's proud of you. How often do people hear that? And the power of I'm proud. Wow. I haven't been told that since I was in high school. So I think those are the two most powerful things leaders can do. There is a certain amount of trust in every relationship. And if there's not, then you're micromanaging position, which you never want to be in.
These phrases, first of all, I don't think I've ever told an employee that I'm proud of them. So now that's going to be added to my toolbox and I'm going to go make sure that I do that.
Try it once.
Have you done it before?
Yeah. The first time it was done to me was one of our shareholders, our biggest shareholder. I'd done, some particularly difficult things, but, okay, fine. And he said, called me, he said, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. And how I felt so empowered and so terrific after that, I started using it all the time. I mean, you just can't every day. Oh, by the way, maybe I'm proud of you today. They need to do something. But the power that gives people and how they feel. So what are they going to do next? They're going to try to do better next, right? Because you're proud of them. They don't want you to let them down. So I think that's a really powerful phrase. I would encourage every leader to use it.
Okay. So we had to touch mostly now on the they don't know how to do it. But then I heard you also say in the beginning, sometimes they don't do something because they don't want to do it. What do we do with that one?
Again, it's the interpersonal and human dynamics, which every leader has to understand. If you're not an expert in human dynamics, you need to become one if you're going to be a leader, because everything comes down to that. Okay, science is science, mechanics is mechanics, bits and bytes are bits and bytes. Those are easy and those are predictable and those are quantifiable. The human element is not. And so sometimes people don't want to do something because they just don't like you. They just don't like you. And oftentimes they don't like you because they want your job. So they'd like to see you fail. That's why now this is not a lot of the times, but this is some of the times. You fail, I'll get your job. And that's why I don't want to do it. And it's really important to understand when someone doesn't do something, the difference between not wanting to because they just don't want to or because they didn't understand how to. And you'd have to be the village idiot not to be able to figure that out. And if you got a person who's not doing it and you think it's because they don't want to, just ask them, why aren't you doing this? Why don't you want to do this? And listen very carefully to their answers. Could be, I think it's all wrong. It could wreck the company. It's it's unethical or whatever. And then you have to deal with each one of those as they occur. Now, if it's because they just don't like you, now you got a problem. Leaders don't need to be liked, but they do need to be respected. And if you have somebody that doesn't respect you, maybe you're a leader that doesn't deserve respect, maybe that's a different problem. But if you're assuming you're a leader that deserves respect and the person doesn't want to do something just because they don't like you, you really only have one choice. Let's assume it's a systemic thing. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm not going to want to do because I don't like you. Not a situational thing would be different. If it's systemic, you got to ask that person to go work for your competition. If you don't like me, who I am in essence, you're probably never going to like me. And if you base whether you do something you need to do that I've asked you to do based on whether you like me or not, I can't change that. And therefore I can't change you.
That definitely feels like a much bigger relational problem that you can decide if it's worth investing in trying to fix or if it's not. But let's talk about what I think is probably the more common thing, which is like, I don't want to do this because I don't really enjoy doing that kind of work. And so I'm just delaying, or I'm not doing it because I don't want to, because it doesn't feel like the right thing to me, but I didn't speak up about it, or it feels a little sketchy maybe, right? Like, are those things that we just like, how do we avoid getting ourselves into that situation where days go by and then we're checking in and then that's when they finally tell us, well, I'm not really comfortable doing this, or I really don't like doing that work. Maybe there's someone else who could do it. Like, we want them to tell us that when we first say, hey, Mamie, can you go off and, take care of this for me? Like, I want them to tell me then, but what can we do differently so that we can solve that problem before it becomes a problem?
Well, if you've got a team of people you've worked with for the longest time, you can rely, they're going to do what you ask them to do. The only time this arises is if you have a newer employee or it's a repeat kind of situation with the same employee. And so you're giving an instruction or a goal, I'd like you to do this. And unless you're an idiot, you can tell by the look on their face whether they want to do it or not. I mean, come on. And if they look away, they look down, they grumble and all that, then just be frank with them. What's the problem? What is the problem? It doesn't seem like you want to do this. Help me understand why. And if you give them permission to tell you why, as opposed to, I don't know whether you want to do this or not, but you better go do it. The tone of your voice can say a lot too. You give them permission to explain again, if it's an employee that you've had for a long time, you can tell by the behavior when you ask them to do something if there's a problem. You just ask them. I'm a big fan of transparency. Maybe people sometimes accuse me of being too transparent, but if I see an issue with an employee that bothers me or that it's a little quirky, I'll just ask them. And oh, by the way, they can do the same thing with me. If I'm doing something that's kind of bothering you, you have my permission to come tell me I'm wrong, or tell me what you need to know differently about it. It's not that complicated, really. I mean, it's not like, oh my God, this is Blue should put this in a bottle and sell it and patent it. It's not that mysterious if you know anything about people.
So true. And it's reminding me of a client who I worked with that was really frustrated with one of her team members who was consistently not doing like this one part of her job. And I finally was like, well, have you talked to her about it yet? Did you go and say, like, this is kind of constantly a part of our check-ins and our conversations that you're not doing this thing? And she was like, well, we kind of talk about like, what does she need to do? We kind of talk through the, like, how is she going to get it done? But I never really asked her, like, why are you delaying on this all the time? Like, why does it always feel like pulling teeth on this particular thing? So she went and had this conversation, and it turns out the employee thought that it was outside the scope of her job, because when she read her job description, this particular set of responsibilities wasn't on it, which is completely fair. You're giving me this thing to do that's outside the scope of my job. And the manager was like, oh, like that didn't even occur to me that, like, I was asking you to do something that was outside the scope and that you took your scope so seriously. Like, in my team, we kind of all step up and do the things we need to do. And this felt like it aligns with your strengths. And so I gave it to you. And they ended up having a great conversation, but it was only because they did exactly what you were just talking about, of like, just asking people, like, why don't you want to do this? Like, what's going on here? Just talk to me about it. Have that transparent communications can really be.
Well, that's a really good point, Mimi, because too many times leaders play 23 questions. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not going to ask you. I'm not just going to ask you what's going on, what's wrong, whatever. And if more leaders took that approach, they'd get a lot more productivity and satisfaction from their employees, because everybody's got their thing, right? You have your thing today. I don't know what your thing today is, maybe, but you've got some family things that might be troubling you, some financial things that might be troubling you, some work things, but you got them. And I don't know what they are, but they're none of my business. But if you assume people come to work as autonomons and just go, yeah, mein Kapitan, I'm going to go do that, without understanding there's a backstory there, then you're making a big mistake.
Completely, right? We don't know what is going on for folks. And so it's sometimes they're not doing something because they just got too much else going on and we haven't asked them about that. Actually, one of the techniques that I really like, because I've learned not to tell people what to do, because I feel like even just telling them what to do is automatically starting off on the wrong foot. So now I try to create an invitation to say yes. So I'm like, hey, what do you think about, taking this task on? Does that work for you? Great. When do you think you can get that done by? Or it would be awesome if this could be done by Friday. Does that work for you? And that, again, getting them to buy in, will say like, oh yeah, I can do that. And then in the back of their mind, they're like, I'm never doing that. But it's much less if you're giving them an invitation and allowing them to say no. Okay. What else? What are there other reasons, or what else kind of gets in the way of people following through on their responsibilities?
You weren't clear on what you wanted. The bigger the company is, the more, and I've worked in billion-dollar companies and startups, so I've seen it from all angles. And the larger companies especially, but even in smaller companies, the leader speaks in corporate speak, in platitudes. They speak in, well, I'd sort of like to have this done over here. I'm not quite sure what the outcome is that I want. This is mine, right? But this is kind of what I want to do. And they're not clear. You have to be very, very precise in your communications at all times, but especially when there's an important assignment. And I like to use the 3 C's of high stakes communication. One, has to be crystal clear. 2, it has to be convincing as to why you should do that. And 3, it has to be compelling, because otherwise, why would anybody do anything if they weren't compelled? So if your message doesn't have all 3 of those, then it was your fault in asking people to do something that it wasn't their fault. They didn't understand. It was your fault because you didn't spell it out clear enough. And that's probably what I see more often than not.
Oh, yes. I'm wondering if you have a story from your personal life, or from your work life, or from your clients, where like that element of being unclear has kind of gone awry, and the power of what happens when you are clear.
It's situational depending on how clear you have to be and how important the communication is. I'll give you an example. A company I bought once was way out on the West Coast, and I never had any intention of leaving them out on the West Coast. I'm in Minnesota, so I'm not going to try to manage an operation 2,000 miles away. That'd be crazy. And I didn't need to, because what they made, I was making them already. And so it's a classic case of place gets bought and it gets shut down, right? I was very clear when I went out at the day of the close. I had a meeting with all the employees. I was very clear on what my intentions were. I didn't try to leave. I needed them for a certain period of time to continuity of the product. And I felt some people said, don't tell them you're going to shut it down. They'll sabotage the place and just make them think everything's going to be fine, which would be a lie and not my style. So I told them, I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm sorry about it, but it's sort of, the way things are. We're going to have a severance package for each one of you, a continuity package for those of you that stayed. So, and it was fair, and nothing bad happened. And the same day I was in, so that was a pretty crucial communication, because if I blew it, there'd be sabotage, there'd be missed deliveries. I wouldn't be able to optimize the value of the company. And then the next day I flew back to Minnesota and had a meeting with all my employees. I said, this week I've given very different speeches. I just closed California down. And as a result of that, all of your jobs now became much more secure and perhaps even more interesting because of that. The reason I'm telling you this is because they got bought and closed down because they weren't constantly improving productivity, quality, output. And I said, so the lesson is we don't want to ever be the one that got bought, because that'll happen to us. And the way to do that is, so it was a teachable moment.
What a beautiful way to take a challenging moment in the story, or kind of in the ethos in there, and turn it into something that's a really powerful motivator to keep going.
I do that all the time. Whatever I used to be, I tell the tale. This is now, it's dated now. I used to tell the tale of the employees all the time of the Twinkie and the iPhone. Twinkie just got one belly up. I think they just got reorganized, but this they belly up Twinkie. Now it's gone. The iPhone, it's not. And why is that? Why was the iPhone getting better and the Twinkie getting organized and bankrupted? And then I used those because they weren't doing this and they were doing that. And that's, you have to constantly remind people what they're doing and why they're doing it for. Because if you let people walk into the building and check their brains at the door, sooner or later, the company won't have any brain.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Such an important, just constantly that we need to be engaging our people and that they have so much to contribute if we just get out of their way and let them do it.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I teach a little bit about delegation sometimes, and I always like to use stories that like everyone can relate to, no matter kind of like what your job is. And so, or kind of what your life experience is. And so I was telling a team a couple weeks ago about how my husband delegated to my kids to take out the trash. And he explained, take out the 3 trash cans. You have to take the bags down to the street and leave them. And he sent a picture of like exactly the spot where the kids needed to put the trash bags. And we were out. He texted the kids, reminder, take out the trash. Came home, trash was on the street. Good job. What was happening with the trash bins? The inside containers were just like sitting next to the trash bins with no new trash bag liner in it. They hadn't been put back. And he was so frustrated. He was like, why did they like not refill them and put them back the way they were supposed to? And I was like, well, you asked them to take the trash out, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
You didn't ask them to put new liners in. You didn't ask them to return the trash bins to the proper position. So like you can kind of fault them for like not using common sense, but also like they did what you asked. So to me, this is like such the epitome of the perfect example of like, sometimes people do what you ask them to do, but you didn't ask them to do the right thing, or you weren't as clear or comprehensive, or you didn't give them the whole picture and didn't do what you wanted them to do, but they did do what you asked them to do.
Yeah, and that's a case of assuming they knew what to do after the garbage went out. Assuming they would know to put a liner in, instead of asking them, well, what do you do after you put it out? He assumed that I'm not trying to pick on your husband. He assumed that they would know what to do because hell, everybody does. And that's a mistake leaders can make, is assuming people understand the entire assignment.
All right. What else? What other tips or tricks do you have for us on how to help our team members be motivated to do their work, to take things on, to ask questions, ask for help, all that? What other tips and tricks do you have?
Let's go to 50,000 feet first. If you take the broadest possible view, and if you ever remember, the author's name was Collins. I think it was either good to great or great to better or something. His thesis was get the right people on the bus. And so at its most fundamental level, you have to have the right people, the people that are aligned with the values of the company. It's another chapter, values and culture. I won't get into that, but they're aligned with the values and culture of the company. They're motivated, and assume, that like how much you pay them and what kind of benefits you have. They're all dissatisfiers. I don't know anybody who has ever gotten a raise who wasn't dissatisfied with it when he opened it up and saw what the government got out of it. So you can't rely on paying the highest in the area and having the best, because that's just not going. You need to be competitive. Don't misunderstand me. But at the end of the day, people want interesting work that fulfills them, to be associated with nice people that are kind to them, and to work for a leader who gives a hoot. I won't say what. And in fact, Harvard did a study many, many years ago. I won't remember all the exact numbers or details, but they ranked, 5,000 people, whatever. What's most important to you? Pay, working for a nice guy, gal? They didn't phrase it that way. Or benefits or whatever. And by far, working for a leader who cared was more important than money. Now, most people expect it's all money game, all money game. No. Money has to be there, but people want to be respected by their leaders. And so if you get the kind of person who appreciates that, that's the most important thing. And if you are the kind of leader who appreciates it as well, let's assume that's in place, then you start building the building blocks for the kind of people that you want. Companies all have cultures. You know this. But most of them have what I call cultures by default, not cultures by design. And so you need to make sure your culture is built by design. That will attract people of a certain kind because of the culture. As an example of my culture, just in the factory, my company, we have no bosses in the factory. It's a completely self-directed workforce. They walk in every morning, they put up something on the computer. What were the orders today? And they go build them. And everybody's cross-trained, so wherever the orders are today, we'll build it. It would be a mistake to think everybody wants that, though. Some people don't. Some people want to check their brains in at the door. And we repel that kind of person when they find out it's a self-directed workforce. They go, all right, what does that mean? It means you do your thing. They're more powerful and they're more productive than any other kind of workforce. But it would be a mistake to assume that everybody kind of wants that. So you have to build the building blocks of, in my view, a self-directed work team that aligns with the values of the company. We have eight or 10 of them. One of them, as an example, is community. We give about 5% of our profits to philanthropic organizations in town, and that attracts a certain kind of employee who think that's a good thing. Now, some people could care less, and I don't want them. And so your values and the employees' values should be aligned. And once you've got those building blocks in place, you'd be amazed at how all these misunderstandings kind of go away. And all these, I don't want to do it, but I won't tell you why, go away. And that's probably the most important thing you can do.
And I'm working with a client right now who's struggling with that. And they're discovering that different people have personal values that are in conflict with each other, that is making it very hard to work together because the organization hasn't set an intentional set of values or culture for people to align around. So it is so powerful. Okay, but we have to start to wrap up. Stephen, can you tell us about a great manager that you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
I used to work alongside this guy at one particular location, and he was a devil in disguise. He was always fighting me at every turn. He was always critical of me, and I really hated the guy. I just absolutely hated him. Well, fast forward about a year later, I took an assignment at a place, and all of a sudden they moved him in as my boss. Oh my God, this is going to be horrible. I don't like the guy. I never liked the guy. I never will like the guy. And he was the most fabulous leader because he didn't hold that against me, that we had little spats and spouts in our previous assignments. And he just walked in and he said, you know what? I know we've had some issues in the past. You can forget about that, because I was worried about it. Who wouldn't be? So you forget about that. It's a new slate, and we're going to work great together. In fact, we did. We worked hand in glove in very, very complicated, difficult situations. It did very well. And the most admiring quality he had, as far as I'm concerned, and this is probably where I learned it, he was very open, he was very transparent, and he was very honest.
Amazing. Amazing. And where can people learn more about you and keep up with your work?
Probably the best, easiest place to find me is, you could Google me, Steve Blue, but best place would be stephenlblue.com, my personal website. That links to my company website. That one's a little harder to spell and remember, and then you can find out anything you want about me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again for coming on today and chatting with me. It's super fun.
My pleasure.